I've recently run into a couple of conlangers who didn't use the International Phonetic Alphabet for their own conlangs. When I was starting conlanging, knowledge of phonetic transcription systems was just assumed to be a part of the hobby. So I was curious about their reasons. So I discussed it with them and also ran a small survey to get some ideas of how people learn IPA and what they find challenging about it. Now, the IPA definitely isn't right for every conlang. It's not going to be useful if you're creating a sign language or if you have aliens with a radically different vocal tract. But if you are creating an oral language speakable by humans, that's exactly what IPA is designed for. Let's talk first about what IPA is for. IPA is a phonetic transcription system. It's used to show how to pronounce things in a universal way. It's not something you would use for everyday writing of your language. That's what a romanization is for. But it is helpful for providing pronunciation guides and discussing the phonology of your language. One objection that I did hear that I want to tackle up front is my audience would not understand IPA. There are two things I would like to say to that. First, whether the general audience understands or not, IPA is useful for communicating with linguists or with other conlangers. Second, and I think more importantly, if you are going through the trouble of creating a conlang for your setting, you will attract people to your audience who are linguistically sophisticated or who will gain an interest in linguistics through your language. This is going to be a small part of your audience, but they may be among the most active in fandom spaces, so there's some commercial value in getting things right for them. Third, learning IPA also gives you some basic phonological theory knowledge. Even if you don't remember all the symbols, learning how to read the charts will introduce you to concepts you need to know, like place and manner of articulation and terms for the positions of vowels. There are some caveats to following the chart, but it's a very good introduction. Plus, just the act of learning builds metalinguistic awareness that will help you in the long run. This isn't going to be a video where I teach you the IPA. I could do a series on that if people like, but right now I just want to give some notes on how to overcome the obstacles people have. And those obstacles seem to largely involve either difficulty in learning the system or difficulty using it for technical reasons. People reported a number of issues in learning the system, and I'll start with broader concerns and go down to narrow ones. First, the amount of memorization and the scale of the system was seen as an issue. The IPA has 107 vowel and consonant symbols, 31 modifier diacritics, and 17 additional symbols for suprasegmentals, such as tone and stress. That's definitely a lot. The system was designed to represent every linguistically distinct sound in human language, so it has to be pretty hefty. But here's the thing. You don't have to memorize everything. In intro linguistics courses, we typically start by teaching the IPA symbols for the language of instruction, which in my case was English, which makes it easier for students to immediately start practicing. I strongly recommend that you similarly start off with the IPA for your own native language if possible. Then branch off from there. Keep in mind that if you have a broad familiarity with European languages, most of the values for the Latin characters used in IPA are pretty close to what you would expect them to have intuitively. Sometimes they're a little different from what you expect in an English speaker, but you have a pretty good head start if you have some familiarity with Romance and Germanic languages. Once you have the IPA of your native language down, just focus on grabbing the symbols you need as you need them. Studying Russian, take a look at the IPA chart. Creating an Indic-inspired conlang, take a look at a few Indic languages and maybe learn how to represent retroflexes. Getting more into specific issues people have. Of the segments, people tend to have more problems with vowels than with consonants. As a former phonetician, this tracks. I'll let you in a little secret. Are you ready? Vowels are kind of bullshit. Okay, well, the IPA vowel symbols do represent something real, but no speaker comes close to exactly hitting these discrete points in the mouth. Instead, if you look at diagrams of people's actual formant values, there's a lot of variation. You can see here that vowels can even overlap each other's possible space. It's also a common thing for the same symbol to be used for sounds that are slightly different. If you look at these charts of bilingual Cantonese English speakers, the English oo is slightly more central for a few speakers than the Cantonese oo. And the truth is, it's just a fact that many English speakers do front this sound to the point that in another language, we might notate it as, say, barred U. But we don't, because there's no distinction, just a wider acceptable range. Consonants have this problem to some extent too, but since most consonants involve two articulators either in contact or coming close to touching, they're going to be a lot easier to pinpoint, which is why we use sagittal section diagrams to teach consonants, but not so much vowels. Finally, we have modifier diacritics and suprasegmentals. In my survey, these were consistently rated difficult more often than either consonants or vowels. First, I will say I rarely use modifier diacritics outside of aspiration, palatalization, and labialization. This is another case of learn what you need right now. When talking about vowels, modifiers, and even consonants, the actual values of any given segment don't matter as much as the distinctions between segments. In reality, speakers will vary in their realizations, and you are not necessarily going to need to drill down on those phonetic details for a conlang. For instance, this diacritic makes a sound dental. Now, I learned how to pronounce a dental t for Spanish, so I know the difference, and I can pronounce it t versus t. Have I ever used this diacritic in a conlang? Absolutely not. And I would not do so unless I specifically wanted to distinguish dental t from the alveolar t, which I probably would not, because I struggle to hear the difference. Even after I was informed that Artifexian has a dental t in place of standard English th, meaning his dialect of Hiberno English has this distinction between dental t and alveolar t, it's still hard for me to hear it. For another example, the phoneme sh in English is basically always rounded. It's just something we do when we pronounce the sound. So we could potentially write it with a labialized diacritic or a more rounded diacritic. But I've never seen this done. It's not distinctive, and it doesn't really do anything notable to surrounding sounds. Sure, some languages will have fine differences in how they pronounce things, but it's not something you need to dwell on. you will probably have more fun and be more productive if you don't sweat distinctions that don't matter in the language at hand. Reminder, I have a PhD and my dissertation was in phonetics. If I don't know how to use all this stuff off the top of my head, you can feel a bit more comfortable not having every IPA character memorized. For supersegmentals, I would recommend everyone know how to mark stress because it's important and it is a little weird to get used to. Beyond that, learn what you need. If you need tones, learn tones. You have two alternatives to choose from. If you need intonation marking, learn it. But don't be too worried about knowing everything. So, to review, when you're learning IPA, the important thing is 1. Start with IPA for your native language. 2. Look up symbols as you need them for a project. 3. Focus on distinctions you need rather than phonetic detail, especially for vowels and modifiers. There are two sides to the technical issues with writing IPA: typing and encoding compatibility. For typing, there are some keyboard layouts out there that can help. I use the SIL IPA keyboard layout for Keymanः. This does require third-party software on your computer, but it mostly runs smoothly. Mostly it just doesn't like Discord for some reason. On mobile, I use a third-party keyboard app that adds an IPA keyboard to my options. You can see the link to that in the description. I'll admit that in both cases, there's an issue with remembering where to find less used symbols. That's definitely something you'll have to deal with for any input method. When I can't remember the right key combination, I generally go to this page, which you'll see on screen, and it'll be in the description. It's called the IPA Chart Unicode Keyboard, where you can just click on a symbol on the IPA chart and copy it from the text box. Good for occasional use, but if you use something over and over, it may be less useful. In terms of display compatibility, I can see that being an issue for some applications. If you have UTF-8 encoding enabled and a compatible font, such as DuloSil, CarisSil, or the Google Noto fonts, you should be able to display the right characters. But even in our modern age of ubiquitous Unicode, we still run into edge cases where it's just not available. In those cases, maybe you could choose an alternative system. X-SAMPA is basically an encoding of IPA into all ASCII characters. This is what we used when I was a beginning conlanger on the internet, back when not everyone had a way to type or display IPA. There are other ASCII-based transcription systems, but I would prefer X-SAMPA because it supports every sound that IPA does, while alternatives like the ARPAbet are language-specific. To wrap everything up, learning IPA doesn't need to be scary, and it can really be useful in documenting and communicating about your conlang, and even in learning more about phonology. It's okay to start small, starting with the sounds of your native language and branching out. There is also an alternative if you really cannot get around the technological hurdles of using IPA. I do really hope that if you haven't been using it and are making languages that can be represented in IPA, you'll try learning. I'd like to thank Madeline James and Amai Guri for their input on this video, and also to the 90 respondents to my survey. I'm going to include some learning resources down below. I will say one resource I didn't think about that so many people pointed to in the survey was Wikipedia. And you're right, there's an article for every single IPA character. And Wikipedia and Wiktionary also consistently use IPA for pronunciation guides if you want some practice. If you like this video, please leave a like so I know to make more tip videos like it. And if you want more conlanging content, including my monthly podcast and weekly conlanging live streams, hit the subscribe button. And you can also support me on Patreon for conlang polls and early ad-free videos. Also, I'd like to announce that if you are an author or filmmaker or game designer and want to incorporate a conlang into your own project, but don't feel confident in doing it yourself, feel free to drop me a line at the email on this channel's About page. I have a PhD in linguistics and about 15 years of experience in conlanging and would be happy to discuss working with you. Thanks and happy conlanging.